Welcome everyone. In this module number 3, we will talk about virtual network and peering. And this is part of AZ-303 Microsoft Azure Architect Technology Certification. And that is module number 3. Now, when you start thinking about virtual machine in Azure, the first thing which should come to your mind is about virtual network, the network behind which the VM gets created, and it gets its private IP address. Imagine that you have no public IP address assigned to a VM. A VM will be part of a virtual network and will get a private IP address. And there are a couple of concepts because this is a software driven network, right? There is no such option available for you to manipulate the physical hardware, but you can everything do through script or PowerShell or CLI. Even you can use the REST API to interact and modify the create virtual network, modify the setting of it, create things inside that. So what all things you can do in virtual network conceptually. So let me share my whiteboard. And if you begin thinking about like what all different things you have. So if you consider Azure has got a virtual network defined. Okay, so what you get is sometimes known as VNet or virtual network, is an address space. So if you say that this is my virtual network, which is 10.0.0.0/16, the first VM, when you create a first VM pointing to this virtual network, gets an IP address called 10.0.0.4. And the question is that why it is not 0 or 1 or 2 or 3, why it starts with 4, mainly because it preserves initial few IP addresses, in this case 4 IP addresses, for its internal activities, like if there is any gateway etc. required, so it will use that thing. Now definitely this has got a few IP addresses here, so you probably need to split that up into multiple subnets. So you create subnets, but when you start creating the subnet, right, you need to understand, like if you create too many subnets, it will be very difficult for you to really maintain and manage. So create few larger subnets, right? And then you keep creating these virtual networks, right? And then virtual network is within a region. So when you create a virtual network, you create everything, let's put it in a region. So it is tightly integrated with the region. So you choose a region, let's say East Asia, and everything gets created in East Asia. Now if you have another virtual network, let's say created in somewhere else in the world, let's say it's in East US, then you can connect these two virtual network by something called peering, which we will come a little later. But you can have two virtual network in two different regions. You can also use VPN gateway to send the traffic between these two virtual networks, right? Now when you create multiple virtual networks, you need to ensure that there is no overlapping IP addresses here. So for example, when you created this previous virtual network, you put this address space over here like this, right? So you created this address space. Now when you come to this virtual network, you create this with maybe, let's say 0.0.16. So these two are so that they are non-overlapping. So you create the first one as 1.0.0.16 just to make sure that they don't overlap with each other, right? And that helps you when you do start peering between this virtual network. You should not cover the whole virtual network with a single subnet covering all the IP address spaces. Reserve some address spaces for future. Maybe you create more than one subnets, right? And then the best practice I told about, like you should have a large VNet with multiple subnets, right? And then secure your virtual network by assigning something we call at network security group, or NSG. So this network security group really allows you to define the rule which IP addresses are allowed for inbound traffic, what are the IP addresses which are allowed for outbound traffic, etc. Now the communication to the internet is important. That means the VNet now can communicate with outbound to the internet by default. There is no such. So if you have a VNet and then you have internet, the outbound communication is kind of, if you call it, default. So you don't need to do anything at all, but you can stop that behavior, right? You can say that I don't want this to happen, so I want to restrict this. So you can restrict those things by defining a network security group. You can communicate virtual network with on-premises resources. Assume that this is your on-premises and you have either server or you can have your laptop, right? And then you have this cloud virtual network. Okay, and then you can bring them both in, right? Connect them through some secure pipe. And there are a couple of options available to build this kind of setup. The number one setup, we call it as point to site, or commonly known as P2S. So what P2S says that you have your virtual network like this, and then let's say you have only one device, that is your laptop, maybe a field person using the laptop at the customer location. So they need to connect this virtual network. So you use this point to site connectivity and then use some agent over there. So, and that agent needs to be configured by some key. So you enter the key, agent gets configured. Now this laptop can connect to this virtual machine. So if you have 10 such devices, you have to do this 10 times. But this is good or required only when you have devices, individual devices outside of the corp network, or bring your own devices kind of scenario. The second option is site to site. So you have your VNet. Let's put this VNet like this, a dotted line. And then you have your on-premises network. This is on-premises. And now you have machines, users, servers, all residing within this. You build some secure connectivity between these two, and that is known as site to site. Then you do not need to worry about how many machines are getting added to either here or here. They can talk to each other because now they think that these two are integrated connectivity, and that uses on-premises. That's a communication between your on-premises VPN device and the Azure VPN gateway, and this is an encrypted tunnel but uses internet. It happens over the internet. Now, this is something not acceptable in many secure enterprise kind of scenario. And then they say that I need to connect this virtual network with my on-premises, not over internet, but over a private line. Now you have this site-to-site sort of connectivity, but this time you use something like express route. Okay, this is a lease line between your data center that is on-prem, okay, to the provider data center somewhere. Let's say if you have a provider, so they will build a lease line between your data center and the provider data center, and that provider connects to Azure via fiber optics. And depending on the pricing tier you use, you get the power and the capability. You can filter the network traffic by many different activities. We briefly talked about NSG, Network Security Group, and that basically can help you define the traffic or filter the traffic to and from resources by IP address. So you can filter by IP. You can filter by port. You can filter by protocol. So you can define these things. You can also have something called NVA, Network Virtual Appliances. And it's a VM, basically. At the end of the day, it's an Azure VM, right? And then it performs a network function such as firewall, WAN, optimization, and other network functions. You can also route the traffic. So if you want to route the traffic, route the network traffic, let's say if you want to route the network traffic, how do you route? One is route table. So you can create custom route table with routes that control where traffic is routed to for each subnet, right? And then you can also have BGP, that is Border Gateway Protocol. If you connect your virtual network to your on-premises network using an Azure VPN gateway or express route connection, you can propagate your on-premises BGP routes to your virtual network. So you can pretty much apply the same setting over here. There are a couple of additional virtual network capabilities which you can use with Azure services. Like you can have dedicated instances of services into virtual network. The services that can be privately accessed within the virtual network from on-premises network. So private link to access privately a specific instance of the service from your virtual network using on-premises network. You can also use something called a service endpoint. Service endpoint allows service resources to be secure to the virtual network. So all within that virtual network or part of the virtual network or extended virtual network can access those Azure services securely. No public IP access will be allowed on those Azure resources. That's the whole idea. Now we talked briefly about like if you have two virtual networks. So imagine that you have this VNet and then there is a VNet available, and then you can connect these to VNet, VNet to VNet. You can use something like site to site we talked about, like which generally is being used to connect a virtual network with on-premises, but you can do that. However, there is something additional we have introduced called peering, right? So we will focus a bit more over here. Peering. So we call it VNet peering. You can also use that VNet peering. But there are a couple of differences here in that VNet peering aspect of it. So let's focus one by one. What all differences? So if we talk about limit, okay. So if you talk about limit in the let's say I try to draw a table, and then I just put this, and then I say peering, and I have got VPN gateway. So if you talk about peering, it can handle up to 500 virtual network peering per virtual network, right? You can just refer the networking limit documentation about this. And for VNet gateway, one VPN gateway, one VPN gateway per virtual network, right? And maximum number of tunnels per VPN gateway will depend on the gateway SKU you select. There is a pricing difference also, cost, right? When you design, you have to keep them in mind. There is a pricing for ingress and egress, and then it is hourly egress only. The encryption here, for it's a software level encryption recommended. You can use IPsec, IKE policy. You can apply over here for VPN gateway. For bandwidth, there are a couple of limitations, right? There is no limitation, no limit for bandwidth, okay? And then it is totally on the SKU you select. The initial setup time is very fast. Setup for peering, it is very fast, and I will show you a demo how fast it is. And then this takes around 30 minutes to set this up, because it creates a virtual machine, install things, configures, and etc. So typical scenario for peering, data replication, database failover, something like that. And then in the VPN gateway, you basically talk about encryption specific scenario. The one aspect I wanted to quickly touch on about the peering is that peering is non-transitive, which means that if you have, let's say, if you have a virtual network A and a virtual network B and a virtual network C, if you do a peering between these two, let's use this symbol for peering, then by default this doesn't connect. They don't connect. They don't happen by default. You have to explicitly peer them. That's one thing you need to consider. If you have this transitive kind of behavior, then you should be using the peering. That is why you use an hub and spoke model, right? And then it helps you connect to between the VPN gateways, peer those two VPN gateways, and then go extend that to your on-premises multiple networks. Let's see a quick demo on how you can basically set up a peering. So let me first help you understand what I tried to build over here. So what I have pre-created is a virtual network, and I name this as VNet1. And then I have another virtual network. Obviously, I name that as VNet2. I created a virtual machine called VM in this called VM1, and then I have another VM called VM2. Just remember the number. That's how they correspond to each other. Now they are not connected, and I have a different address space. So assume that I have this in one VNet, and in this I have this in another VNet. So you completely get two different private IP addresses for this VNet VM when they get created. So let's see how we can create a peering between these two virtual networks. So let me switch to my demo machine, right? And then I show you this screen. So you can see that I have got a VNet1. If I just open the VNet1, I basically see that I have got an IP address 10.1.0.4. That's the IP address which got assigned to the VNet. So let me go to the VNet1 and go into the overview of the VNet. Right, you have the subnet. You see the default subnet is this one, and there are 250 IP addresses available in this address space. And then similarly, I have got another VNet, that is VNet2, and you can see that it is in East Asia. So let me show you the two locations as well. So VNet1 is in East US. You can see that it's in East US, and VNet2 is in East Asia. Two different region, and it is 10.2.0. That's what the address space is. So you can see the address space mentioned over here. I have got corresponding two virtual machines. One is Ubuntu VNet1. That is my Ubuntu virtual machine, right? And then if I go into this Ubuntu 1, let me see if it is connected. It started already. It has got a public IP address. So let's just use this public IP address to log into this Ubuntu machine. So if I do an SSH to this Ubuntu machine using my username and the address, and I say yes, and I just say the password. That is number one Ubuntu machine. Now similarly, I will open another SSH for the second Ubuntu machine. So I have the same username but a different IP address. So I will go to this and open the second, that is VM VNet2. And VM VNet2 is also running and has a public IP address. So let me open this. .13.75.73.176, and I say yes. I just provide the password. Hopefully I remember it, and it is connected. So both of them are connected side by side. So I will just keep them open. Now also I would like to show you that this VM is having 10.2.0.4. The other one is 10.1.0.4 because I only have one. So let me also show you just to confirm that other VM which I was referring to has got now that 10.1.0.4. So if I come to the VNet2 and try to ping the first virtual machine. So let me see if the ping works. Localhost. So it is now pointing to the local machine. That's fine, right? And if I say ping 10 dot, this is number 2. So if I say 10.2.0.4, this is itself. So self is pinging fine, right? But if I say that 10.1.0.4, because this is the other machine, you don't find that machine. So it will just wait for the ping to happen. So let this ping run here, and for the other one, what I'm gonna do is that I'm gonna run the ping. Okay, so let me run them side by side. So I'll say ping 10.2.0.4. That's the second machine. So they will not ping each other because they are not connected. These two virtual networks are not connected. So if I go back into, let's say, this subscription, that virtual machines, and then go to home, and then I go to this resource group, and then open any one virtual network, right? And then I go to the peering, and if you see here, over here, is that you can now add a peering. When you add a peering, it says, what is the peering link name? I am doing a peering from 1 to 2. So 1 to 2. I name it like that, VNet 1 to 2. Okay, and then I just leave all the thing as default. If I have to use a virtual network gateway, if I have a virtual network, I can use that, but let's just leave it. Now this is one thing. For the remote virtual network, that is the second VNet, I just name it as VNet 2 to 1. I have to set that up. If it is, let's say, completely different subscription, and you need to just give the resource URL, you can give the resource URL. If I know my resource ID, you click that and it shows the resource ID and provide the resource URL. If it is in the same subscription, you can pick up from the subscription. So you choose the subscription you have access to. You need a little bit of additional activity. If you have two different subscriptions, you need to log in there and approve it, and then it will get the handshake done. So I point to the VNet 2, right? That's a remote VNet, right? And then everything is fine. I say okay. Now you can see that it starts doing something, right? It's saying adding the VNet peering, and I just keep them open, right? Now we'll see the moment the handshake happens, right? You can see the notification, right? Something happening in the Azure portal on top here in the bell icon, right? So I will let this flow go, and then once the validation is complete and the peering is done, because it is faster than creating the VPN gateway, you will see that the ping immediate starts. That means the handshake is done, and you can see that added a virtual network peering and the ping got started. And now if I go back to my settings, so you still see that the Azure is doing some final touch, but actually the handshake has happened. You can see that now my VM started talking to each other. So the 2 is pinging 1, 1 is pinging 2, right? So they are kind of fine at this moment. So if I go to this resource group and see this VNet, go to the peering, you see that the status says it is now connected, right? Which means now I am able to basically connect and then You can see that status is connected. And if you go to the other VNet, you will also see, I haven't done anything in the VNet 2, but you will see the because it's handshake, so it is kind of connected now. The gateway transit is disabled because I do not have. If I go ahead and delete it, right, you notice the experience. If I delete it, and it will start deleting, and the moment the deletion process is started and it kind of removing things, you will see my ping kind of will stop, right? They will not move. It is not moving at all, right? It is not moving. It just stopped here. So it did not happen. Nothing is happening at this point in time. No movement is happening. They just paused, right? So they couldn't ping each other anymore because that handshake is gone, right? It's pretty simple. It's easy to configure, and it is very practical to use. Hope you like this VNet and its peering topic. For more such videos, please subscribe to this channel and follow the playlist. Have a good day.